This is Embodied from PRX and WUNC. I'm Anita Rao. Is devoting your life to art worth the sacrifice it requires? Writer Stephanie Elizondo Griest has been asking this question since the early days of her career.
My love for what I do made my life logistically a nightmare. Or impossible.
Stephanie hustled for decades, putting aside life milestones and stable jobs to write. But she eventually reached a point where she needed reassurance from other female artists who had chosen this path.
I am bowing down to this muse that is driving everything that I do. And so I need to find my community. I need to find another chanter in the dark if I'm going to continue down this path of being an art monk.
One woman searched to understand what it takes to build a life dedicated to art. That's just ahead on Embodied. Dedicating your life to art in this country is often an uphill climb. And it is one Stephanie Elizondo Griest knows well. At each juncture of her career as a writer, Stephanie has had to make some hard choices.
Should I write or should I pay my rent? Because I realized I couldn't actually do both.
That question came to Stephanie in her early 30s, after almost a decade of trying to be a full-time writer. Although she'd published numerous essays and gotten a book advance, the math wasn't mathing. So she put all of her stuff in storage and set off with only a backpack. She went from one writing residency to another, couch to couch, and that hustle continued for years. The list of things she'd sidelined to make room for her art was getting pretty long, and Stephanie started to have some doubts.
So not only personally am I feeling this way, but also just the barrage of questions from everyone who loves me and cares me and is concerned for me. Like, what are you doing?
By the time Stephanie turned 40, these doubts had solidified into one big existential question. How do you determine if art is enough for all the sacrifices it requires? This is Embodied, our show about sex, relationships, and health. I'm Anita Rao. To answer the question, is art enough? Stephanie embarked on a 10-year-long journey. She traveled the world seeking out other female artists. She'd witnessed firsthand how women in art are underrepresented and underpaid. So she was eager to understand why and how they chose the artist path. Those stories are captured in her new book, Art Above Everything, one woman's global exploration of the joys and torments of a creative life. Stephanie is also a professor of creative nonfiction at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We'll travel around the world with her soon, but her story of becoming an artist starts in Texas with her dad. He was a drummer.
Two things really come to my mind in regards to my father's influence in my life. The first was just, my mother was the breadwinner of the family. She would dress up in the morning, power suit, shoulder pads, get her briefcase, march off to IBM, was gone all day long. My dad, however, just seemed to have such a cool life. He would take me to school. He would go play tennis with his buddies. I'd come back. He would be gigging with his bandmates. And then when I would go and actually hear him perform, he was extraordinary, just such a force of nature. And I would just feel myself like hurtling through the cosmos by his music. And also what I think made an maybe even bigger impression on me is for my bedtime story, every night he would take down the globe and he would spin it and he would stick his finger on it. And wherever it landed, he could literally tell me a story about wherever his finger landed, even if it was out in the middle of the ocean, because he was on an aircraft carrier for 10 years in the Pacific. And so I knew intrinsically as a child, I wanted to do this. I wanted to find something that could take me, first of all over the world, but then having so many meaningful connections with people.
How did you choose writing as your art form?
Well, it was kind of a process of elimination at first because I was pretty awful at everything else. My voice cracked in the choir, making little ashtrays, they would explode. So I just really wasn't showing any aptitude in anything else. So here I am, as a kid trying to find my form. And my grandmother, the very same woman who found my father's form, she discovered my writing just by echoing back to me that I could do it. This is my father's mother, my very beloved grandmother in Kansas. We would go visit her every summer. And once I ran out of reading material, which for me is just, grounds for like serious panic. And she's like, "Oh, well, let's go look at the letters." And so she opened up this armoire, which I'd never seen before, and pulled out this big stack of letters. And she was reading me letters from my dad, and they were just so incredible. He was writing to her all throughout his amazing travels all over Asia and Europe and Morocco. And then she started pulling my letters out and reading my letters back to me. And I could not believe she was doing that. I'm like, "You kept my letters?" And she said, "Of course, they keep me company." And that really struck me because even as a child, I perceived my grandmother to be lonely. And then it became evident when she was reading my letters that brought her some joy. And I'm like, "Well, I'm going to write the best letter I can," even as a kid. So then I just started paying attention and moreover started thinking, well, what can I do that would be more interesting? And that became an interesting motivating force in my life as well.
So you had some early affirmation that you had a skill in writing. You went to college, you did some international traveling, and then you were starting to get into the field of journalism. So kind of by day, you were being a journalist, but by night, you were working on a memoir about your travels. You were still really doing creative writing. Then there was a moment where you had to, for the first time, kind of make a decision between your own art and a stable career.
A stable job.
Tell me about that moment.
Yeah. So that was 1999.
Okay.
And I had already lived in Moscow and Beijing, and I had just a stack of notebooks of all of these really incredible things that I'd witnessed being in Moscow right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, being in Beijing. I was an editor of the English mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, I'd really seen some wild things. So that is what was my motivating force. I had been hired by the Associated Press, but fortunately my job didn't start until like 10 or 11. And so I had a substantial morning of working on this book. So I would, get up at like 5, 6 in the morning, and I would write for several hours before I would go to work, and then I would come home and I would edit what I'd written. Back then, when you got a job with AP, you had a 6-month probationary period.
Okay.
And so at the end of the 6 months probationary period, I had actually, written a couple of chapters of this book, and I was so excited about it. And AP, meanwhile, was excited about me, and they offered me a job. It was a real job with a real salary and health insurance and dental insurance and, all the things you're supposed to want and need. But I had this book, and I did not know what to do. They offered me a job on a Monday and were surprised when they realized, they thought that I'd be happy, and they just could, see my face, and they said, "Well, we'll give you till Friday. Why don't you think about it?" And I said, "Okay." And so, Monday goes by. I'm like, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I'm like bicycling home down Congress Avenue, and I'm just like begging La Virgen, "Please send me a sign, somebody send me a sign." And I went to check my mail, actual mailbox, and I opened it up, and there was my very first acceptance letter from Latina magazine.
Okay.
And it was for $500 for this essay that I'd written just about wanderlust. And $500 was my exact rent at the time. And I was like, okay, this is it, And so I said no. And then things very quickly happened. Like I suddenly realized, well, in addition to the $500 rent, there are many other bills that come along, in the course of a day. So within a couple of months, I had to move back in with my mom and dad in Corpus Christi, Texas. And that's when the real writing began.
Are you someone that looks for signs? Like, is this a theme in your career?
Yeah. No, it's all about the sign, because that's really literally all we have to go by as artists. I didn't know anyone that had done what I was doing, so no one could give me advice. And I was constantly trying to determine how I can continue being a writer. I felt so alive doing this. I write in the style of what they call in Mexico testimonio, which is deeply, deeply witnessed reporting. My challenge was that my first book, for example, which is called Around the Block, My Life in Moscow, Beijing, and Havana, that book made an advance of $10,000, right? Yeah. So this book, to which I had made all of these sacrifices, quitting jobs, saying no to relationships, moving back in with my parents, moving to New York City to try to make a go of it, working 3 jobs, like just an unbelievable amount of sacrifices that I made to publish this book, because I loved it, because I believed in it, because I wanted to do right by everyone who had shared those stories with me, earn $10,000. And I continuously had that experience in publishing. So I was just reaching really hard for universe to tell me what to do.
So you made all of these sacrifices in your 20s. You were really hustling. Then you spent a lot of your early 30s on the road. You went from writing residency to writing residency. And you started at a certain point to kind of identify with this term art monk.
Yes.
Tell me about
art monk.
what that
Okay.
is and why did you feel like you were becoming one?
Yeah. So art monk originated as a joke, which is I was living in Querétaro, Mexico at the time, and I had the best setup in Querétaro. I was living with a bunch of painters, and they were all Mexican men, and they were all gay.
Okay.
And they were all fabulous, and they were all so confused as to what I spent so many hours a day doing. They're like, "What? You look at your computer again? Like, what's in there?" And they were also very concerned about my lack of a sex life. So finally, when I was trying to explain like what I am, I was like, soy como una monja para arte, like I'm like a nun for art. And they just thought that was hilarious. So that's just what they started calling me. So at first it was a joke. Then I entered a period of like total nomadism, which was from 2006 to 2009. All my stuff is in storage. I'm living with a backpack and a knapsack, and that's all I've got access to. And that was a period of my life where literally I would go anywhere that was free and or cheap and where I wouldn't be bothering anyone, so I could just write. And so that eventually led me to Leb Shemaya. So Leb Shemaya is a Catholic house of prayer in Sarita, Texas, 90 miles north of the border. And in order to stay there, it was at that time $15 a day. The catch is you have to take a vow of silence to be there. And so first I'm like, what? I cannot possibly take a vow of silence. Like, what does that even mean? What does that look like? But when I got there, I had this kind of panicky moment when I realized, oh, I am already living a life of silence. I'm not someone who can write with music. In fact, I really need total silence. And so I was being amazingly prolific at this place. I was doing some of the best writing in my life. And then I realized, oh, it's because it is silent. And then I discovered there were two canonized hermits at this residency that had taken vows of silence in the 1980s. And I started wondering, like, what is actually so different between how they spend their day and how I spend my day? They are there praying for the souls of people they will never meet. And I am writing for the souls of people I will never meet. They are bowing down to their God, and I am bowing down to this muse that is driving everything that I do. We're all doing this in silence. We're all doing this out of devotion. We're all doing this out of love and reverence for something completely outside of ourselves. And so then I was like, there's something to this idea.
Just ahead, Stephanie sets off on an international quest to find other art monks. You're listening to Embodied from North Carolina Public Radio, a broadcast service of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. You can also hear Embodied as a podcast. Follow and subscribe on your platform of choice. We'll be right back. This is Embodied. I'm Anita Rao. Stephanie Elizondo Griest is a writer before anything else. But as she details in her new book, Art Above Everything, her journey as an artist has been as much about sacrifice as devotion. In her 20s and early 30s, Stephanie was able to prioritize writing through finding cheap ways to live, going from writing residency to writing residency and living off the small advances of her first books. But at a certain point, she needed more stability. So she went to grad school, got her MFA, and landed a tenure-track job at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. It was a big transition, both personally and as an artist.
It was hard to stop crying at first.
Yeah.
Like
out of relief?
Yeah. So complicated tears, right?
Yeah.
But just my body was crying a lot. Even just opening up the boxes that had been in storage for so long. I just couldn't believe that a paycheck was arriving, every month. I couldn't believe I had health insurance. So all of those things that had just, really so much of the worry and stress of my 20s and 30s was all related to finances. And now that that worry had been taken off the table, I hardly knew what to do with myself. But when I kind of got over that sort of just gratitude tear, then came another kind of tear, which is I suddenly realized like I am an adult, by physical appearance and by reality, but inside, like I could relate to my students more than I could relate to the faculty in a way. I felt really developmentally stagnant because everyone my age was married, they had children, they had houses, they had mortgages. And then I began to kind of anguish in the fact that I had just tried so hard and I'd sacrificed so much to be a travel writer vagabond. And so to leave that lifestyle was really, really, really sad. So it did take some adjustment.
Did it feel like a sacrifice? Like, were you putting your art a little bit more on the side by choosing this profession? Or did it feel like this was going to allow you to do your art?
Wow. So there's so many ways to look at that. One metaphor that, for better or worse, I will offer is to be an artist is to climb a mountain whose peak you never see.
Mm.
There are moments in your life where you get to a really beautiful scenic spot on that mountain and the clouds clear and you're like, oh my God, this view, maybe when you publish your first book or, something else significant that happens in your writing life. And so you're so thrilled you have this view. And then you look down and you're like, oh my gosh, there are all these other writers and I should be helping them. And so then you extend your hand and you start pulling up, but then you start hearing some noises coming up from above and you look up and like, oh wow, there actually are some writers that you actually really admire and they're on another view and they're amazed at that view. So then you're like, which one do you do? Should you be spending your time helping the people climb up to where you are or should you continue climbing? And so that has been the sort of like existential struggle mindset that I've been contending with for the last, 15 years probably. And I am definitely, especially now with this particular book out in the world, I am starting to feel like I do want to spend more time helping people get up, in particular Chicano writers, because we don't have much of a presence on this literary scene. So my ambitions now are moving a bit more away from my own individual work and more toward how can I be support to the Latino literary community as a whole.
I want to take you back for a minute to that moment of starting this new chapter, feeling some existential questions around where you were as a young professor
Okay. Yeah.
and where the people were around you, and how this led to your desire to meet other women artists around the world. Like, what were you looking for
Absolutely.
from other women?
Okay, yes. Another observation I made when I was at Leb Shemaya is what I feel enabled these actual monks, how they were able to do this is they were doing it in community. And so it maybe felt less alone. It's easier to spend your day in your cabin praying for the souls of the world when you know this woman you're in community with is also doing it too. So you're by yourself, but you're in a community doing this. And just psychologically, that really helps a lot. And so I began feeling that way. I need to find my community. I need to find another chanter in the dark if I'm going to continue down this path of being an art monk. And so I had this idea. And just as I was beginning to feel this need, there was another sign from the universe, which is I got a little ding on my inbox. I had done a fabulous artist residency in upstate New York called Art Oh My International. And the director of that had just reached out to everyone, all the alumni of that residency saying, hey, guess what? I just started a new residency in India. And India had always been, I've always considered India to be like the PhD of traveling.
As someone who's spent a lot of time there, I agree.
And I had actually, so I have this whole other like story of just trying to go to India. I'd actually tried multiple times in my life to go to India and something kind of catastrophic happened every time. So just the fact that it was in India, I was already like, ooh, is this a sign? But then I read about where this place was going to be held, and it was held in Uritnagram, which is the village of the extraordinary classical Indian dance troupe, Uritnagram. It's founded by a woman. All the dancers there, at that time anyway, all women, and everyone who worked there also a woman. So just like a woman feminist village that eats, sleeps, breathes dance. And so I was so incredibly lucky. The first summer after becoming a professor, I got to spend a month with them and went there to work on a different book, but very quickly was like, oh, no, this is the book. I am entering into a book right now.
So this began a 10-year journey of traveling around the world, meeting women artists. And with this very first kind of experience that you had, in your book, you write about kind of spending the day with these dancers, and some aspects of their day were really relatable to you, like the devotion to the craft. You were like, I get it. I know what it's like to be in a room alone and write for hours. But this question that was kind of burning for you all the time was like, how do you think about your legacy, and how do you think about if at the end of your life you're going to look back and think that all of this devotion was kind of worth it?
Yes.
Tell me about what shifted for you through spending time with them. Like, how did they help you think about art and the sacrifices in a different way?
Yeah, so at this point I arrived in Uritnagram actually literally the month before I turned 40, which is a pretty landmark birthday for a woman who hasn't yet had children. So it's really last chance to do this. And I'd had a year of online dating by that point, and I'm like, oh wow, there's really got to be some kind of like divine intervention if this is going to happen, right? Yeah. So and again, I'm in a environment where most women have already had children, and I was for the first time in my own life around at Enneagram artists who were like, no, not doing that. This is my baby. This is my child. This is my everything. This is my universe. And I'm going to dance until I can no longer dance. And there will come in that day, but this is just my journey. Enneagram is structured as a gurukul. So students would arrive to live and work and garden and cook and share meals alongside the guru for 6 years. And this is how the classical arts had been passed down in India and in a different time period. And this was sort of resurrecting this system. And then it just also occurred to me of like, how do women become artists in other countries? This showed me this really radically different model that I had not yet tapped into in the United States.
You kind of started at the beginning of this book with this question of, do women artists fare better elsewhere? Like if you have, socialized healthcare, or if you have subsidized childcare,
right,
does it look different to make art? What did you find?
Absolutely. So Iceland is probably the best case in point. So Iceland is 91% patriarchy free.
Oh, okay.
They have it down to the decimal. Yes, yeah. Yes. And so in Iceland, I was really blown away by everything that happens. Obviously, socialized healthcare, also so many benefits for mothers. You have prenatal care, you have so much time off. Both parents get all of this time off. And it's well documented that the World Economic Forum has declared Iceland for many years running to be the best place to be a woman on the planet, right? And I interviewed 8 women writers there. So first of all, like being a writer, period, in Iceland, literally you get royalties when your book is checked out of the library.
What? That's amazing.
I mean, that is amazing.
That's amazing.
If you write in Icelandic, you can apply for a state grant every single year of your career.
Wow.
So I met women who were essentially being paid by the state to write novels in Icelandic because they are, the country is very concerned about the loss of language. So all of the women writers I met, all lifetime writers, people who had published 8 books, 10 books, all had kids. And actually not just one, they had like 4 and 5 kids.
Wow.
I don't know, do I know any woman in the United States that has that many kids and books? I don't think I do. And all 8 of them did.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you kind of document like the sacrifices kind of externally look different based on your political circumstances, the kind of economic dynamics of the culture. But there are those really personal questions that every artist is asking about, what does it mean to lose some of my time to child rearing? What does it mean to have a partner who I'm also kind of taking care of? How were these conversations about relationships affecting how you were thinking about your own relationships at that point in your life?
Oof. Okay. So I have identified 3 models.
I'm ready.
Yeah. This is just based purely on my own research. There's nothing scientific about this. Okay. So there is sort of the artist/patron model. During my period of extreme nomadism, that was in my early to mid 30s. It started off as a joke, like I need a patron. But then it was like, no, I really need a patron. And then incredibly, I did indeed meet someone who made 12 times my salary.
Wow.
And all of the problems I had at that moment in my life literally could be solved by a swipe of his credit card. And so he did do this for me. One time I was in New York and my flight to LA got canceled. And my plan was literally to curl up by a potted plant in JFK airport. And he's like, oh no, I just booked you in a hotel. So just things like that. Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. Like I am so unbelievably grateful that this partner came into my life at that moment. Long term, it does set up obvious challenges in terms of just equity in the relationship.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the power differential is pretty extreme in that kind of a relationship. But anyway, then there is the alpha beta situation. And that is when you are dating another artist. The longest lasting relationship I've been in, I was with an absolute 100% alpha artist. This artist was extraordinary. We once went to the Ubuntu Festival in Rwanda, and the Ubuntu Festival gathers artists whose nation has survived genocide. And so we arrive the day before the festival, and she's just at this point my companion, she has no involvement in the festival at all, but she brings her violin. She's this world-class violinist. And we walk in, and it's just this flurry of everyone's running around, trying to get ready for this massive festival on a shoestring budget. So no one even looks at us when we walk in. She takes out her violin, and she somehow instantly captures the energy of everyone running around, frantically trying to get ready for this, with also the gravity of what we are doing. And she begins to play, and literally everyone just literally drops what they're doing and turns around, jaws dropped, sits down in front of her, and just begins to weep and sway. And like no story I can tell can do that. That's what I mean by alpha, right? It's like, I'll bow down to this. So there's extraordinary things about being with an alpha artist. The challenge, of course, is that it's really easy to lose sight of your own artistic practice, especially as a writer, because what are you doing as a writer? You're just sort of staring into a screen. There are so many very instant and obvious ways to help a musician, like literally carrying the violin case and carrying the amplifiers and those like active things you can be doing. And also it's way more fun
than sitting at a computer.
You are doing. Yeah. So, and additionally, what can be challenging about that kind of a relationship is that jealousy can arise, competition can arise, and probably the worst situation is you become their student.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I didn't experience any of those three in this particular relationship, but I have witnessed that many, many, many times over with others. So then it becomes almost like the intellectual equivalent of the artist-patron model, because there is this sort of power differential. Then there is what I'm currently in, what I like to call like two monks in a monastery model. So this is when, and this is rare, but when you find someone who is in the similar place in their career that you are, and you can really just sort of relax into, we are lifers, we are in this for the love, we're in this for the devotion, and then you can have the joy of just doing it side by side. And that's amazing.
I want to hear more about your current partnership, but I do want to talk first about the question around kids and the ways that you have weighed that throughout your career. There is this really big chapter of your own personal story that kind of played a big part in this decision. So I want to tee that up.
Yes.
So you were a couple of years into traveling around the world and meeting women artists. You had published your 5th book. You were engaged to someone, and this partner had a really strong desire to have kids. So the two of you had been talking about that, but you said, okay, I need to go on this big book tour. Mm-hmm. And when I come back, we'll really kind of talk about this kid question.
We'll talk about the kid question. Yeah.
So you go on the book tour, and 2 weeks into the book tour, some strange things start happening to your body.
Yeah. So the first thing I noticed is that when I would eat, I would feel full in my neck. So it was a different sort of satiation. And I was also having some pretty profound acid reflux, which I'd never had before. And it was easy to explain it away because I'm on book tour. I'm in Texas. That means every night we're going out for, enchiladas and like margaritas inside of my head, So I am really indulging in all the Tex-Mex that I don't get to eat on my normal day. But I'm suddenly not able to eat more than a few bites. And so I noticed that. But also I was on I think that was maybe 40 cities. I mean, I had like unbelievably ambitious book tour. And so nothing's going to distract me on a book tour until one morning when I was about to fly back to North Carolina to unpack and repack, I woke up bleeding. And it was obviously not menstrual blood. And I just, again, all we have as artists is to go by as signs. And obviously that's a sign like, okay, I need to call my doctor immediately. Yeah. And she took me the very same day. So my doctor put her hands on my belly and she just looked at me and she goes, "Are you pregnant, Stephanie?" And I was like, and so it's something that intense, you try to make a joke. And I'm like, well, I am Catholic, like immaculate conception is, always a possibility. And she said, you feel like you're deeply pregnant. And so she immediately got me an appointment at the radiology, and somehow my left ovary had grown a tumor the size of an oblong basketball.
Basketball.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So the reason I was feeling full up to my neck is because the food literally couldn't pass around it. Yeah, scary stuff. So whole book tour canceled instantaneously, which was my concern at that time because I'm so obsessed with my books. That was to me the tragedy of that moment, or maybe it was just simply what my mind could grasp, as opposed to the other very major loss, which was about to happen, which is I was about to lose my womb, and I did, and so that was very intense, obviously. And then they discovered, so when they first removed the tumor and did the pathology, it did not show sign of cancer. But then a week into it, I find out that there was indeed cancer in the tumor, and I was now going to have to undergo chemotherapy. So the first 2 weeks were just profound panic attacks, anxiety attacks. My mind, it was really hard to take hold of my mind until I began to use my art. So the first way I used my art was my entire practice as an artist has been to travel to unusual places and really do deep witnessing and note-taking. And suddenly that world was brought like into my own body.
Yeah.
And so when I made the change of, instead of having a panic attack about what was happening in my body, when I instead began to write what was happening in my body, that made me curious about what was happening. And so that leap of freaking out about it to suddenly becoming curious really saved my mental health completely. And then it also became about, oh, this is what I do. I take notes, I observe, and now I'm just going to have a quieter observation of just what's happening to me internally. So that was one thing that was happening. Another big thing that happened is all of my life up until that moment, I felt like I was always in a pool of doubt and bobbing, sometimes treading water, sometimes drowning, but just water all around me, drowning in doubt. And that is where my life switched from doubt to certainty. And cancer really was that land bridge.
Certainty about whether art was enough?
Absolutely, 100%. Because obviously the child door closed. But with that came total certainty. I would have thought I would have collapsed over that knowledge. What I instead collapsed over was the knowledge that I couldn't do my book tour, you know? And I realized that must sound insane to 99% of the people out there. And I agree, it is insane. But there is 1% of you that's like, yeah, that's true, you know?
Just ahead, we'll hear what changed in Stephanie's life after all that doubt turned to certainty. And she'll take us inside her dreams for her next decade as a writer. We'll be right back.
It's rare to find a podcast that can actually change your life. But when the show's called Life Kit, that's kind of the whole point. I'm Marielle Segarra. 3 times a week on the Life Kit podcast, we guide you through a topic we could all use help with, from personal development to healthy living to managing your dinero, with takeaways so you can start living what you learn right away. Escucha el Life Kit podcast from NPR.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.
This is Embodied. I'm Anita Rao. Stephanie Elizondo Griest has been a writer for decades. And for about as long, she's had doubts about the choices and sacrifices she's made for art. It all culminated for her in one big question. Is art enough? To answer that, Stephanie spent a decade traveling to 12 countries and talking with many other female artists. She asked them about living an art-filled life and how they decided what sacrifices were worth it. These women helped her settle some of her own doubts, and Stephanie shares their stories in her new book, Art Above Everything, one woman's global exploration of the joys and torments of her creative life. But true clarity came for Stephanie a few years into her work on the book, when she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She was forced to take stock of the choices she'd made for art, like not getting married and not having kids. And what she felt? was relief.
It was a galactic shot of euphoria.
Yeah.
It was just like I felt it in my whole body. I felt it in my whole being. I felt, thank God I had chosen exactly as I had chosen, because I realized if this was my exit off the planet, well, first of all, if I'd had a kid, I mean, that would be a whole other level of grief. And my books were done. I had just published the book that I had spent all of this time on. So it's like, okay, legacy is done. If I go now, I have health insurance, like there will be money left over. I can use this to start my grant to fund future writers. Like, it was good. I could go.
Your mind
And
was
yes.
fully thinking about
Yeah.
art, it seems like, at that point.
Totally. Yeah. So there was the land bridge to certainty. There was panic attack stop when I began to take notes. And then the third final thing, which was such an incredible gift, and I also want to share this story, is that I decided to turn my imminent hair loss into an art performance, performance art. So just a little word about my hair. My hair is very important to me.
You have beautiful hair.
I love my hair so much. I have not changed a style since 1992. And there's also some family things about hair. Mexican culture really values long hair. And indeed, my maternal grandmother, who I never met, my maternal grandmother unfortunately committed suicide when she was 25 years old. But one of the last things she said before dying is that she did not ever want her infant baby son's curls cut. Anyway, so like not cutting hair is like a thing in my family. And so losing my hair, which is, long and brown and curly, and I have always felt like it is the most visible marker of my of being Latina, which is a big hang up that I've written extensively about, but will not go into now. I was devastated that I was going to lose my hair. So what I did, I'm so glad I did this, I decided to turn it into an art performance. So I invited over an Italian opera singer, my partner at the time, who is an extraordinary violinist, another cancer survivor, a photographer, a psychologist who is also a best friend, my mother, and Diane, who is the owner of Beehive Hair Salon in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And they came over, and the opera singer began to sing these old woman melodies. And she had this, tambourine hand drum and just pounding. And then, my partner goes in with the violin and just this crescendo of music to drown out the sound of the shave. And my mom held my hands, and that is what got me through that experience. Yeah.
So we marked that as part of the way through this journey of traveling and interviewing artists. I'm curious about the lessons that you kind of had gleaned from these women that shaped what you wanted to do next on this journey. Like, you'd had this personal transformation, this personal moment of clarity. Art is enough, I think. I guess, what questions did you still have? And why did you still need to keep searching after having that clarity yourself?
Yes. So the next few people that I spent time with post-cancer, well, the first thing, I had total clarity, the kind of artist I needed to be with next. It just came into me with just deep body knowledge is I need to go hang out with belly dancers.
Okay.
Because,
you have to tie that thread for me.
So I was once a belly dancer in my 20s, and that was a really happy, joyful period of my life. And I knew I needed that kind of energy around me. And belly dancers, if you've ever spent time with them, are profoundly self-possessed women who have total control over the region of my body that had just been utterly traumatized. And so I knew I needed to be with them. So I can't even remember why I was in Miami, but I looked up who are the belly dancers in Miami. And unbelievably, again, like universe just always aligns things. There was going to be like this major international belly dancing conference that same weekend I was in Miami. I mean, what is the chances of that? So I go there, and it's very immediate who I need to spend time with, which is this incredible woman named Stephanie Elizondo. She's Cuban American, and she, in her own words, was like the mafia of the belly dancing community. And she's like the den leader, and just so beautifully spoken and just so powerful. And I just really respond to people's energy. So this is someone I wanted in the orbit. And so went out with her in between panels. belly dancing panels and workshops, I took a little bit of her time, and she began telling me this was like the precursor to the really big thing she was doing, which is the Havana Habibi Belly Dancing Festival. And I'm like, okay, that's in 4 weeks in Cuba. All right, clearing the schedule and going with you, right? So this was a gathering of belly dancers from all over the world, plus like I think 80 Cuban women and girls gathering together in the national. I don't think I can remember the exact name, but where the National Ballet of Cuba rehearses, which is literally a neoclassical palace, and that was an unbelievable experience. It was initially difficult for me, just because I arrived. I'm bald. I am emaciated. I lost all of my weight during that time, so I had such extreme scarring on my body
After
and
chemo.
and I'm also just, I feel like I'm walking in clouds, I had a hysterectomy, but they had to really cut a lot because the tumor was so big. So I had this really very scarred body. And I was surrounded by unbelievable human beauty, like incredibly beautiful women all around me. And so the point where I would forget what I then looked like, and I would catch a glimpse of my mirror, and I would just just have this body shock and so there was even this moment where I was taking a workshop, and we were motivated and inspired and commanded to go and create our own hip signature. And so we're all like lining up in the mirror, and every woman is, kind of moving her body in a certain way, trying to find like her signature move through her hips. And this is a moment when I've forgotten what I look like, but I look up and I just freeze and I can't believe what I look like. And this Cuban woman next to me just somehow is looking in the mirror at her own body, but sees my look and just somehow understands completely what I'm going through. And it turns out her body, when I look at her abdomen, it is also completely scarred. She'd just gone through a cesarean, seemingly around the same time I'd gone through my cancer. And just without words, which is what I love so much about belly dancing, she began to move so that I could follow her. And we just created our hip signature together. Yeah.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
So you finished chemo, you were in remission. When did you decide it was time to stop traveling and stop this search for other women to talk to?
Oh, that was totally COVID, actually.
COVID?
So arbitrary, but not arbitrary deadline.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was only one woman I knew I had to interview just because I loved her. So, and actually, I discovered her through COVID, the performance artist Ayana Evans.
Okay.
So I did do one interview beyond that. But actually, COVID just became its own hard deadline.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was also getting to, I can't spend more than a decade on a project. So by that point, I could see that I was nearing the 10-year mark. And I'm like, all right, I've got to stop this.
So you had asked this question in a number of different ways to a number of different people. Is art enough? How do you know when art is enough? And surprisingly, you got a similar answer from a lot of the women that you talked to. First of all, they all said, yes, art is enough. And they all kind of described a similar way that they knew. Tell me about that.
Yeah. You know what? Maybe what I'll do is I'm just going to read how I've structured the book, because that gives one word the answer. Art is inheritance. Art is a spiritual orgasm. Art is reconciliation. Art is descent. Art is self-actualization. Art is a waltz in the palace of the moon. Art is revenge. Art is medicine. Art is unzipping your body. Art is a house of your own. Art is lineage. Art is love. Art is immortality. And so these were the motivations of all of these different women, and this is why they did it. They all kind of came to their own truth. For me, art is freedom. And that's, I think, why it's been so difficult to, at different moments in my life, for money, needing to give it up, because I do feel like I'm losing freedom.
So you are in a partnership now. I'm curious about how all of this deep reflection about the way you want to relate to art and the role it plays in your life shapes how you show up in this romantic partnership and what makes it work.
Yes, it's so lovely. So he has a beautiful way. He's a poet. And he has this beautiful way of speaking about our art, which is he calls them our thought children. And so that is how we spend our day, tending to our thought children. And to take that metaphor just a step further, I've had such an incredible experience. I'm currently on a book tour for Art Above Everything. I'm going to, so far, 35 cities. And he has accompanied me for the first leg of the tour, and I was a bit nervous about that, how that would go down. And only to realize, like, he's a stepfather for this thought child, and he is in the audience, gets teared up every time. He's seen it probably 13 to 15 times now, and it's like open house at the Monastery of Art, and we are co-hosting it. And so, he's completely present when I'm doing my thing. And then when it's over, there's a book line, and he goes up and down the aisle, introducing himself, talking to everybody, making everyone feel at home. Like, he is totally the stepfather for this slot child. Like, it's amazing. It is amazing. So yes, the Two Monk in a Monastery model I highly recommend for those of you in artist partnerships or seeking for an art partner. Better yet, you don't actually have to go on Bumble to find them. You have to go to an artist residency. So that's where I met my partner. That's actually where a lot of artists meet their partners, is at residencies, because that's where you find people who are equally devoted.
So to the young artists who are kind of coming up to you in the line on your book tour, or who are taking your classes at UNC, who are looking around them at this moment of art in the United States, what it means to create art, the funding that exists for it, and trying to really practically think through the question of how do I make it work, and how do I know if and when I should keep going? How do you answer that question for them?
Yes. So my students, I am brutally honest. With my students, I literally write out the numbers, which are very scary. I write out my own numbers. So 3 of my books, I literally spent 10 years working on. So 3 decade-long endeavors. And then I did other things, concurrent with them, but 10 years on 3 different books. And those collectively, royalties and advances, equals $33,000. 30 years.
Wow.
Of everything. Yeah, that's it. $33,000. That's it. So that in and of itself is enough to get a lot of people to turn away.
Yeah.
Right. And, other books were more successful, but all the books together don't quite equate, or actually just slightly are over what I make in 1 year as a professor. And everyone knows that professors are notoriously underpaid as well, right? So we're talking really small numbers. And also I have them look at my website and see how many events I have done. I have done close to, I think I'm over 400 events now, hand selling my books. And hand selling these books for such a long time. I've still only sold, 11,000 copies of my first book, and I've been hustling it for 2 decades now, right? So it's just, that kind of math should turn almost everyone away, but the one person left standing loves it. Loves it so much they're still standing, and they're still listening to me, and they're still engaging, and they're still taking classes, and they're still wanting to go, because they know that they are not living their true path unless they at least try it. Also, I say that there was a moment not so long ago when you could pick a career, attend a university as wonderful as ours at UNC Chapel Hill, and if you were reasonably apt at this job, you could know that you would have it for 40 years and have a decent retirement and, have a happy life with your grandkids, right? That day has passed. And this actually our students are keenly aware of. They're watching this all happen all around us.
Yeah.
So being an artist has always been impossible, but now everything is impossible. And when everything is impossible, anything is possible.
So you say at the end of your book that while art was the thing that caused volatility in your life throughout your 20s and 30s, in your 40s, it became your primary self-soothing technique. You turned 51 this summer.
Yeah.
What role do you expect art to play in this next decade of your life?
Yes. Well, the instability is all around us, right? So literally, I discovered that with first cancer. Note-taking is what kept the panic attacks away during cancer. Also helped me feel like there was a reason and a purpose in all of this that I was going through. It was to write it down. I'm really finding note-taking is sort of my safety blanket through these very scary things that are happening all around us all the time now. What I hope to, if I'm lucky to survive this period of profound instability that we are now enduring collectively, what I hope to do is create a place of sanctuary. And so sanctuary and also funding. Actually, last year for my 50th birthday, I started a grant called Testimonios Fronterizos, which is out of UT Austin, which is my alma mater in the journalism school. It's for students who are from the border, who write about the border. The border is a subject that I've devoted about 20 years of my life to covering. I was able to raise $27,000 for that. So it's endowed, but I want that to become a bigger endowment to continue funding border reporting, because obviously we need people from the border to actually write about the humanitarian catastrophe happening in our homeland. And then what I ultimately want to do is start a writer's residency in Mexico and invite Chicano writers to come connect with their homeland and also connect with their own spirit, their own love, their own devotion, their own immortality.
Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for your beautiful book and for this conversation. What a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You can find out more about Stephanie Elizondo Griest and her book, Art Above Everything, at our website, embodiedwunc.org. You can also find all episodes of Embodied, the radio show, there, and make sure you're subscribed to our weekly podcast. You can find behind the scenes and bonus content for our show by following us on Instagram. Our handle is @embodiedwunc. Today's episode was produced by Kaya Finlay and edited by Amanda Magnus. Wilson Sayre also provided editorial assistance. Nina Scott is our intern, and Jenny Lawson, our technical director. Quilla wrote our theme music. This program is recorded at the American Tobacco Historic District. North Carolina Public Radio is a broadcast service of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm Anita Rao.